All right, welcome back everyone who is watching. And I just wanted to make a quick video describing how you should maintain your mower, or what sort of things you need to do in order to make your lawnmower last 20 or 30, 40, 50 years. Because I do have mowers that come in for repairs, well, that I take care of. And I have one of my own that's almost 28 years old now. And yeah, I mean, I know it may seem obvious to some people, but for some people it necessarily isn't really that obvious. And this is going to apply to any and all small engines, or just engines in general, whether they're diesel, two-stroke, or four-stroke. And so obviously the first place you got to look is your engine. And for the most part, generally, I'd say it's going to be pretty rare that you're going to necessarily need to do a whole lot of maintenance. A lot of stuff's going to go a long way. So most common sort of things you're going to be doing is going to be, your oil change, your spark plug, and your air filter. But I mean, just even, on your machine, odds are on your machine somewhere or in a manual, you're going to have your service interval. And they're going to have some of this really dumb stuff that's like every 8 hours, change this stuff. And you don't, well, initial service is different than everything else. But they'll have some like real goofy stuff. And if it's like inspect tire pressure, it's, if your tire's flat, it's going to be rather obvious. Most of these riding mower tires are like 10 psi at most. But you'll notice like every 50 hours, air filter, oil, spark plug, just the common stuff. Every 100 hours, change, clean your cooling fans, your mower belt, sharpen your blades, clean the underside of your deck, check your tire pressure. That's actually funny that it says every 100 hours. And then one thing they'll usually have for a lot later is check your valve lash every 200 years. And so you're probably like, well, what if I don't have an hour meter? How much does that usually equate to? Well, basically, about 50 hours is pretty much how much the average person's going to put on their riding mower, lawn mower, push mower, you name it, piece of equipment every year. So basically, once a year, you should be doing this stuff. But generally, on equipment, you don't necessarily need to do that. You could go 2 years without it, or 3 years if you really use it, or it's a small yard, just, sort of use your head on this sort of stuff. And you'll notice on my particular machine, I got 250 hours. Now, granted, I got this out of a junkyard for $200, so this isn't exactly the highest quality machine or anything like that. But generally, the most important things you're going to want to focus on is every year with your mower, any mower, you're going to want to do your oil change, and that includes your oil filter. And you're going to want to change your spark plug down there, usually right next to your valve cover, right towards the front of the engine. And you're going to want to change your air filter, because if you can see through it, if you shine a light through it and you can see light through it, your air filter is generally still good. Now, if you can't see light through it, it's time to replace it. And, these things, you'll last like 2, 3, 4, 5 years or so. But I get some that are like 20 years old, and yeah, that's why your engine doesn't run. And, most of the time, if it's not running, you do a quick change up on it. That'll generally help it out. Now, if you just did it and, you've done all the basic stuff with it and it still doesn't work, you're going to have to go into further diagnosing. And the majority of the time, especially on these Briggs & Stratton engines, let me get you down in there, you're just going to have this sort of petcock, and there'll usually be a little yellow cover on here. Take that yellow cover off, and you push down, and you twist. I think it's counterclockwise. Yeah, counter. Just twist it, and then it'll open up, and that's how your oil drains out. And that's just generally all the maintenance you're going to need to do to your engine. And obviously, I prefer to have 2 sets of blades for your machines, so it's easy. You can just take the old set off, sharpen it, and then put a new set on that you resharpened last year or whatever, just so that way it's easy peasy to remember, or That way you'll know, well, this blade's, if you hit a few too many rocks, you get a bunch of dings in it, or you hit a root, and you can replace those blades and have new blades on, just in case you can't get them within a reasonable amount of time for your machine. And generally, that's what you're going to need to do for most of your mowers. And on some larger zero-turn mowers, you'll have usually a small bottle off to the side or underneath or wherever, and that'll be for your fluid for your itty-bitty little hydros. So that way you can change your fluid on those. And obviously, you've got your battery, and generally, your EverStart battery is going to last you like 2 years tops. I mean, the things are junk. You got to get something better. Duracell's always treated me just fine. The O'Reilly's batteries work just fine. Napa's, the Optimas are fine. I don't know what it is about the EverStarts, but like every single piece of junk mower that I get has an EverStart battery. So don't cheap out too much on them. And you've also got your deck with a lot of pulleys and belts, and usually, as long as you're greasing it and you're taking care of it, you're washing your deck off, you're not going to have an issue with that whatsoever. And just in general, as long as you're hitting all the grease points and everything at least once a year, once every 2 years, at least once a year, then you're not going to have any problems. And a lot of people don't do a lot of that super simple maintenance. And in most cases, you don't need to grease your rear wheels because they're almost always keyed, driven, bolted on, you name it. So you really only have to worry a lot about your front wheels, and that applies riding mowers and zero turns and whatever. And if it's a push mower, you don't really have to worry about it too much. You can basically take it till the wheel falls off, sort of kind of thing. And so one sort of kind of controversial part of a lot of mowers is, the deck wash ports. And in my opinion on these, as long as you do it every single time right after you mow, you're not going to have an issue. But if you start missing them, you miss once, you miss it twice, or it goes too long, then it's caked on there. You're going to have to take your deck off and scrape it. That's not too much of an ordeal on most mowers, but still, you could have prevented it. But, I get it. Sometimes you mess stuff up. Sometimes you miss stuff. Stuff goes wrong, And sort of, that's basically all the common stuff. But one thing you might want to consider keeping an eye on, especially on your zero turns, is your arms for your parking brake. So you see how down in here, it has to fit in there. Well, sometimes what will happen is they're magnesium, but your plate here can wear out over time, and if it gets too much slop in there, so you see these ones have just been replaced, so they're obviously nice and good, but what'll happen is you start it up and it starts to try and drive away on you. So one thing to keep an eye out on for, that's sort of a maintenance item, but not really. And of course, one thing you can do with them is they actually have on some a whole description on everything on how to adjust them and whatnot. And it's usually just some bolt in there or a nut or whatever. You can't really see in there too well right now, but almost always just down there on the side or right in front or behind, there's going to be a little bolt. You can take that out, and then you'll have full free range of speed on your zero turn mower. Or you can set it to a certain degree so that way you can go whatever speed you want at the fastest and still be mowing in a straight line. So, pick your poison however you'd like to do it. Leave it as is or whatever you like to mess around with. And sort of the other parts that aren't always on engines is going to be your fuel pump, your fuel filter, or a fuel shutoff. You don't really ever have to do maintenance to these fuel shutoffs as long as you use them. If you let them sit in one position for years on years, it's going to take a while. Then they can get stuck and not work and drain and leak or whatever. And for fuel filters, realistically, I just change them every year just to be on the, better side of maintenance for them and whatnot. But they'll last. Same thing sort of with air filters. If you're putting junk in there in your fuel tank and you're running it all day and you're going through hundreds of gallons of fuel, you're probably going to have to change it sooner than later. But if you're just, you're not throwing junk in there, you're not putting E85 in here, and you're not running it through a dust bath every time, then generally it's going to last a few years. And your fuel pump, you don't have to really worry about it. It's going to fail at some point, obviously, but it's not necessarily a maintenance item. So you don't have to worry about that too much. And sort of the only time you really have to do liquids maintenance is, you got your gasoline and your oil. And generally, if you got a gasoline engine or a two-stroke engine, you don't have to maintain your oil. It's going to be just fine. You really only have to worry about that on diesel equipment. And the reason for that, I guess I should mention, is that in a diesel, typically it's going to be running longer before you have to change your oil, because in their cases, generally they hold more oil, just overall it's a bigger engine basically. And it'll build up a bunch of carbon in that oil, and then, you got your H-pop or whatever, and you need to lubricate a whole bunch of stuff with that oil besides the engine parts. You're going to have injectors, and you get the whole point. Basically, there's more stuff to take care of with a diesel engine than a gasoline engine, and you're going to have to buy additives. But most of you probably won't have diesel equipment, and if you have it, you probably already know how to take care of it. But you're not going to have to worry about additives. And as far as oil goes, there is a surprisingly ridiculous amount of brands of oil. They're generally all somewhat about the same. And you don't have to buy that like $50 bottle of AMSOIL to keep your lawnmower running for 30 or 40 years. I buy the same generic, conventional or semi-synthetic or whatever, just whatever O'Reilly's has. It's $4 a bottle. It comes in the black bottle, and I've used that for 20 years. I guarantee you there's not really going to be any problems with them. I haven't had my mower detonate and blow up with that stuff. I don't have any problems with it. And, maybe don't go as cheap as the Walmart oil, Super Tech, but you don't need to go all the way clear up to AMSOIL or Lucas and pay loads of money. It's just a lawnmower. It's not, you're not racing with the thing daily. Buy the oil that makes sense for what you're using it for. There is a difference, but there isn't that much of a difference. And so the big issue with a lot of lawnmowers, especially ones that I fix, is that people put E85 in them. Now, down here in the South, there is no E85. There's only 87. That's the bottom grade. So you don't have to worry about it. But what happens when you put E85, 85% ethanol inside your engine is, that's going to eat away at all the rubber, all the stuff in most tanks don't have rubber. They're all plastic. But that eats away at your lines. Your fuel lines are going to deteriorate super fast. So now you can see these lines, they're nice and soft and squishy, flexible, not hard. And that's because I don't use E85. I just have the clear lines in so that way I can keep an eye on stuff and diagnose. But you don't have to have clear lines. Most of the time it's going to be just this plain old black heater hose line anyway. And basically, that's going to destroy any of your paper filament, fuel filters, and it's going to make them not really work that well. It's going to destroy a fuel shutoff, guaranteed. It's not going to work anymore. It's just going to leak all over the place, and it's not going to work. It's going to destroy your fuel pump because that uses a diaphragm and a vacuum, which is why it's got that third line that goes all the way around to the valve cover-ish. On some models, it's different. Doesn't matter. But it'll destroy your fuel pump earlier, and most of all, it will destroy your carburetor, and then you don't even have a working engine. So, do not put E85 in any of your engines. Simple as that. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, 87 and 91 and 93 and 95 all have some ethanol in them. And you can get ethanol free, but it's kind of expensive. So, because I run 87 in all my equipment because I'm cheap like that, and you don't really have to. I've never had any problems with 87 in all the time that I've used it. And that's because I run my equipment. I know that seems kind of silly, but yes, running your equipment will prevent it from breaking down. You gotta make sure you're actually using your equipment and not letting it sit. Because when it sits, it separates, because the ethanol, which is sort of alcohol, but different name, different brand, different process or whatever, will be hydrophilic and it will be attracted to water. So then that will bring moisture in, and then you're going to have water next to gasoline. And obviously that's not very good for any part of a mower because, I don't know, have you tried to run your mower on water? It doesn't really work that well. It's not an electrolysis machine. So as long as you're running it, it's going to be good to go. And you're like, well, what if I got a machine like a pressure washer that sits all of winter? Well, so what you can do, if it's a 4-stroke, I only recommend VP additive. If you go over to Terrell Fixes All channel, he's done a video where, well, he did loads of videos actually on all of the additives, and he tested them for like 2 years. Impressive dedication there. You got to give the guy props. It's a little bit weird. You guys, he's definitely out there, but he makes great stuff, so you can't argue. And this is the only additive that actually seems to work. Now, the problem is some people think that your directions are the same for everything. So you got to pay attention to the fine print, because it's different for if you're putting something in storage versus currently running it. So if you got like, your 2-gallon gas can and you're running through it real quick, you can just put the stabilizer in it. Is this thing gonna, prevent your engine from blowing up or save your crank or stop a knock? No, it's just gonna keep your gas nice. And, it's obviously reduces heat, extends engine life, protects and prevent repairs. That's the only one that actually makes sense, and that's because I don't actually really know what they do, but it just works somehow. It works way better than everything else. And I find generally, as long as it's 87 or above, it's generally still good fuel and will last for about 6 months. Anything past about 8 or 9, 10 months, and it separates. And so I'm sure you're wondering, well, what about 2-cycle? Well, so 2-cycle fuel is really nice because when you get the bottle for premix stuff, it already comes treated with something, usually. And so almost all the time, your 2-cycle fuel is going to be pre-treated with stuff, and you're not going to have to worry about it, and you can leave it for a long time, and it'll still be okay. Now, a long time isn't 10 years. It's over the winter or, maybe about a year. So make sure to shake it up after that year or so anyway, just to be sure. And, you can buy the already pre-mixed stuff, or you can mix it yourself and make a lot more. I just prefer to get this stuff in the can because it just generally seems to be better, and I don't really have a whole lot of 2-cycle equipment anyway. I just have 1 chainsaw and 1 trimmer, so I don't really need that much. I don't really have the justification to get that, oil. And there is a difference between just putting, SAE 30 engine oil in and what the premix, the oil is that they put in here. There is a difference. If you put just plain oil in with your gasoline and you run it, it's going to blow up your engine. Okay, maybe not, but I just want to emphasize the point that there is a difference, and I don't really know a whole lot about it, but there is a difference, and loads of people tell me not to do it, so I just don't do it. There's no point in risking that much on such an investment, It's just silly to blow stuff up on accident, essentially, because you thought something would work out, and it does not. But that's okay. I'll make mistakes. You want to experiment. Maybe that's an experiment we can try in the future. I've never actually tried that, but, maybe if I get some junk equipment, we can do that. Whatever you guys want to see is whatever I'll try to make happen. And so that's basically all that you really need to do to maintain your equipment. And obviously for diesel, you're going to have loads of stuff you can put in your diesel. And there's obviously red diesel as well. And there's loads of additives. I haven't seen anything on them yet, but generally they're all somewhat about the same. And I guess sort of one last point to hit on would probably be your tires. Not so much you have to worry about like tire pressure and whatnot, but what happens on them is, you know, they get old, they get dry rotted like this poor old machine. You'll notice it gets real dry rotted. And then obviously, you know, you put tire slime in there, unless you take the wheel off, then, you know, it's still gonna go flat. So you're gonna have to either add like a tube. I like tubes a lot because they don't dry rot essentially. But in my opinion, you can, you know, spend like 20 bucks on like a gallon of slime. If you just take the wheel off, then you can use the tire slime to coat that. I just almost never pay for new tires. I mean, the tires I got off of the other one were cut up and they had like nails in them. There was nothing left of the tires. The tread was all gone. So it was just time for new tires. So I got new tires for the back. But obviously on a zero turn, the front tires are there to just be there. So they don't really do anything. But, you know, in the case of like a riding mower, you're going to need to be able to turn, so it's got to have traction. And one thing I will definitely hit on is your belts. They're not a service item. Do not just replace the belt just to replace the belt. A lot of times on these riding mowers, lawn mowers, whatever, any mower, is those springs there, they'll get worn out a bit and they'll only work with that old belt. The new belt is just a little bit tighter than your old belt, and you'll have that issue where your blades are staying engaged, you're spinning slowly. It's a nightmare. And if you want, you know, when inevitably your belt is going to snap or it's going to get worn or dry rotted or whatever, you're probably going to have to go ahead and take your whole deck off, clean it up real good, lubricate everything, and probably have to replace those springs. Pretty common issue on those Craftsman ones and whatnot. And it's really not that hard. So, you know, you can spend just a few, I guarantee you, somebody's rebuilt the deck that you have on your mower at some point in time. So, you know, just look it up. And, you know, obviously I'm sort of new to this whole thing, so I haven't gotten to everything yet. And hopefully I will eventually. And basically that's all you're ever really going to need to worry about on your riding mower. Obviously, you know, you're going to have some things like electrical issues and whatnot to deal with, but this is all that, you know, you could expect the average homeowner to do in order to take care of their riding mower. But, you know, just don't worry about belts. If, you know, the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If your belts aren't slipping and basically if your belts aren't usable, if your belts are still working, leave it alone. Don't mess with it. Simple as that. Alrighty, well, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Catch you later.